Okay, today in Chapter 18 we are looking at absolutism, the different monarchies of Central and Western Europe. Look at France. Yeah, Louis the 13th, 14th, 15th, and 16th. 14th from 1610 to 1792. Go to England, Queen Anne. The last of the Stuart line. Also have the Act of Union, which England becomes the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. Form government here is Parliament. So the UK here is the United Kingdom. That's basically England. Georgia is 1, 2, and 3. Prime Minister is Walpole and William Pitt. Go to Prussia, which basically ended up becoming Germany for a good chunk of it. Frederick William I. Frederick II, also called Frederick the Great. And a little further south, Austria, Maria Theresa and Joseph II. Catherine II in Russia. It's called Catherine the Great. Her achievements including the instruction, the events of Pugachev's rebellion, and the Charter of Nobility. Okay, questions on those? Well, in the Enlightenment, like we talked about last time, you have people questioning the nature of government, the proper role of government, the state in people's lives. And that is changing how governments operate. Enlightenment science, Enlightenment philosophy, you have Enlightenment politics. You have a lot of reformist monarchs in the 18th century trying to modernize their kingdoms, trying to make them more popular and more responsive to the needs of the people. For example, the Declaration of Independence in 1776, probably the height of the expression of the political enlightenment. The idea that all men are created equal. The idea that men have the right to create their own governments, to dissolve their governments that are destructive of the ends of protecting the rights of the people. The governments have responsibility to the people. The people have rights. The radical ideas in 1776. But it's the Enlightenment, these philosophies, and these people who are making those kind of beliefs possible and able to be put into action. So you have this kind of enlightened despotism or enlightened absolutism. That is, use power not so much to rule through fear and tyranny, though you do have plenty of those men, but power for constructive ends, power for reform, for great public works, and so forth. Building bigger and better countries. That's what they're looking at this time period. But just ask yourself the question, if you had the power to run, if you were running a country and had the power to do anything you wanted, what would you do? If you had this country where no one had any rights, would you be the kind of monarch that said, okay, people can have rights now. Or I can change this. I can change this situation. I can fix this problem. Would you do it? Or just say, I got all the money, I don't have to do it. Well, many philosophes hope that such rulers could bring reform. Now, most countries in Europe at this time were hereditary monarchies. It is basically one person rules it all. The oldest surviving son gets the throne when the king dies. Or if there is none, they might go to an oldest daughter or cousin. But essentially, you get the job because you're born into it. Not because of any special qualifications, not because of any special training, not because anybody necessarily wants you, just because you happen to be born into that position in that time period. Now, a lot of monarchies in Europe are ruled by the philosophy of absolutism. That is, you have absolute, unquestioned power. Your word is law. Basically, what you want to happen happens just because you said it. Some people use that for constructive ends. Some people use that to maintain order. Some people use that take that to an extreme and destroying themselves and their country in the process. Power.
The same as the dictatorship.
Pretty much. Actually, it's what the English historian Lord Acton once said: "Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely." Actually, the effect is basically the same as a dictatorship. That the monarchy, there is actually some kind of order of succession involved, usually by tradition. But sometimes there have been kings who have written sons out of the line of succession just because they don't like them. In which cases you often have a civil war once the king dies. You also have the idea of the divine right of kings. That is, the idea that you're king because God made you king. It was God's will that you be born in that time, born in that position, to be made king, and therefore anything you do is the will of God, and you are answerable only to God for what you do. You can burn an entire village to the ground for no reason at all, and you have to answer only to God for that. And that did happen. Well, this is one of the prime examples of absolutism. France here. Start with Louis XIII. He's king of France in 1610 to 1643. He's a child of about 6 or 7 when he comes to the throne. Yeah. And this is the problem you have automatically with the hereditary monarchy. The oldest surviving son becomes king no matter the age. They'll have kings that are younger than this. They've had kings who are 9 months old come to the throne because they were the oldest surviving king, oldest surviving son. And of course you have his son, Louis XIV. Louis XIV is just 4 years old when he comes to the throne.
He was 9 years old?
14th was 4. Louis XIII is like 6 or 7.
Oh, 6 or 7.
Yeah. Again, get the job just because they're born into it. Now, obviously, they couldn't identify their country on a map. They couldn't even read or write at this age. So it happens you have government dominated by ministers early, called regency. Basically, they have somebody running the country in the king's name until the king comes of age. In this case, the French government chose cardinals to do this, cardinals in the Roman Catholic Church. They're high-ranking officials in the church, but don't think for a minute these are just kindly grandfatherly priests that think riding a horse to church on Sunday morning. No, these are hardened, cynical European politicians. Cardinals. Cardinal. For Louis XIII, you have Cardinal Richelieu as regent, and for Louis XIV, Cardinal Mazarin. These are men who manipulated their way to power and liked it. And they are not only ruling the country in these kings' name, they're teaching them how to be kings at the same time. Teaching them how to be absolutist rulers. And keep in mind here, Louis XIII, Louis XIV have to be very apt pupils. They learned very well how to be absolute monarchists. Louis XIV comes to the throne in 1643, excuse me. He learns how to be an absolutist, learns that it is God's will that he be king, that he is answerable only to God for his actions. And so he comes of age, he styles himself as the Sun King. Basically, he's the source of light and goodness for all his people. So you have these little sun symbols on all the little royal stationery and royal symbols across the country. absolutist. He strips away the rights of the Huguenots. This is basically these French Protestants living in France because they were not Roman Catholic. France officially was a Roman Catholic country, and therefore Louis decides that anybody who's not a Roman Catholic was a threat to his kingdom, and therefore deserved whatever he gave to them. So the Huguenots had a huge wave of these horrible persecutions, execution, torture, homes seized, churches and property burned. And simply because Louis XIV had the power to do so. But it's also under Louis XIV, you have the Palace of Versailles built just outside of Paris, where basically he's running the entire country. This huge state, hundreds of acres, this monumentally ornate mansion. Hundreds of rooms, all decorated in the finest gold, silver, jewels, crystal. Like I say, spent so much money on it. It's such a great example of architecture of the time period. You have kings and queens all over Europe trying to build palaces modeled after Versailles. Louis XIV, it really, you think of France, think of style, high style, fashion. Louis XIV really gets that idea started. But he rules for decades. He rules for 72 years, dying at the age of 76. He got an early start.
So what age do they normally take over? Do they normally take over?
In most cases, it'd be like around 18. But in some cases, you have some kings who really aren't interested in the job, aren't very good at it, very weak and manipulated, not very apt people, so they might take over until 20 or 25 or even 30, because their ministers manipulate them into it.
The reason to just randomly pick or
yeah.
And I guess they grow up with the Cardinals telling them, like you were saying, and then they probably look at them as father figures.
Anyway, they do
whatever their bidding is, pretty much.
Yeah. These cases, Richelieu and Mazarin are very close to their regents. See them kind of as father figures, very respected, but they are very corrupt officials. Story of the Three Musketeers, Cardinal Richelieu was portrayed as a villain in that story, the French novel. Actually, I have a lot of stories of corruption this time period, based kind of around how the royal family's operating. A lot of stories of a man in the Iron Mask and so forth. So the story of the man in the Iron Mask is a real story. It took place under Louis XIV. Basically, this man was imprisoned. His identity was stripped away and had to wear this mask his entire life. It was a velvet mask, but the story's changed to iron. And everyone's speculating all sorts of things, who it could have been or anything. But we have no information at all who it ever was.
Which king you were?
Louis XIV.
But I guess everybody speculates that it was a brother or somebody.
Yeah, the novels suspected it was the king's twin brother, but if it was a twin, that would have been known and open knowledge, because in those days, royal births were not quiet, private affairs. Basically, everybody saw everything. So they would have known if it was a twin. But suspicion is maybe a traitor, somebody traded the king and maybe had a bunch of information on him, or just didn't have the heart to execute him, or maybe a spy, but I just really don't know. But it makes a neat story. Get a chance to read the story, I recommend it. But of course, then there's another problem with the hereditary monarchy. What if they're idiots? I mean, don't have the sense God gave the common dog. That happens. Exactly. We'll get to that story too. But Actually, suppose you're growing up, you're a young prince, groomed and destined to be king of a great nation. Of course, you'd think that takes a lot of study and preparation. You need to know the laws and history of your country. You know everything about your country. You're going to be a good ruler. Question, what happens if you don't do your homework? You're not going to be king? Next thing, you have to have a college degree to be king? No. For example, Prince Charles, when he becomes king of England, he's going to be the first king in English history with a college degree. Queen Elizabeth and all her predecessors, all trained by tutors. Next thing, you flunk your ACT, you're not going to become king? No. Not going to get your high school diploma? Who cares? Don't do your homework? Nothing going to happen to you. In fact, suppose you do act up and cause trouble. Actually, you can see kids getting yelled at all the time at Walmart for acting up. What happens if a prince were to do the same thing? Nothing. Or in some cases, they might have what's called a whipping boy. Basically, somebody who is hired basically to take the punishment for the young prince. Say, see what's happening to this kid because of you? Next day, a lot of princes not going to bother them.
How much?
Some may do some just to get them in trouble. Yeah.
How much? I know they don't have very. I think it's more done for tradition now. But how much power do they have nowadays, or is it just tradition?
In England, it's just tradition. Basically, everything's done automatically. All your speeches are prepared for you. Power to name prime ministers and control dismiss parliament, controlled by parliament. Basically, in England, your job now is basically to wave to crowds and make appearances at opening shopping centers.
So it just really don't mean anything. Well, it's not saying it don't mean anything, but like...
It's all symbolism, but it means, it's important symbol to them.
Mm-hmm.
Symbol of continuity, symbol of strength, symbol of what's supposed to be good about it. But no real political power.
You don't think they have any pull at all?
A little bit, but they're not supposed to speak out on political issues. But actually, they might have, like, say, somebody lobbying on behalf, say, maybe we should do something for this charitable cause, or these landmines in these parts of the world. Maybe we should do something about that. Just very light-hearted and simple political issues, but not anything so controversial.
Declaring war on the United States.
Yeah. The Navy technically is owned by the Queen, but she can't order said, I want to go water skiing today, so get the aircraft carrier ready. She can't do that. They should stay there, stay there, wave for crowds, and be English. So watch reruns of Doctor Who all day. It's nice where you can get it, but there's not really terribly much to do. Actually, some people in England considering why we just get rid of the whole thing, but it's... The Statue of Liberty means a lot to the United States. It has no real power or influence. It's kind of the same thing with England. We'll get to Louis XV. Louis XIV outlives all his sons, all his grandsons. Get down to Louis XV. It's his great-grandson taking power in 1715 at the age of 5. He doesn't rule on his own until 1743, the age of 33. Not because of the example we just gave. He just really didn't care. He inherited an enlarged empire, enlarged debt, enlarged discontent from the people. So he's just lazy. Doesn't really want to do anything. He's king, he's got money, he's got power. Can date any girl he wants, even though he's married. The Queen wasn't too happy about it. That wasn't anything she could say about it. So his ministers running the government, and his mistresses, several mistresses, again having a lot of undue influence on them. It's just kind of frivolous court life. Things just kind of, anybody does anything they want except to actually run the country. So things are just kind of festering under Louis XV while things are falling apart. Serious problems that need leadership, but remember, absolute monarchy, decisions don't get made unless the king says make them. The king says this is what we're going to do. This is a time when France having a lot of money problems. increase social problems, King's not doing it. So you get to Louis XVI. Comes to the throne in 1774. He's 20 years old, the grandson of Louis XV, completely unfamiliar with the operation of the French government, has no idea how it works. No idea how the bills are paid, no idea how the average people lives. He's grown up at Versailles his whole life.
Is that done by design by the cardinals possibly? So they can have more influence?
Maybe in a way, a lot of those ministers basically just want to keep the kings close for this. They say, "Hey, I'm best friends with the king," and also get a few favors here, a little cash on the side. But basically, there's no need to. They had everything they could possibly want there at Versailles. Basically, all the luxury and wealth and anything the world could want is right there. They could spend days just wandering in and out of the different rooms. Actually, your Thanksgiving, Christmas dinner, a feast, it's nothing to them. An afternoon snack. They throw out everything they didn't eat. They throw out enough food in Versailles in a day to feed an entire French village in a year. And nothing to them. And those people were starving. So Louis XVI comes to the throne. There are a lot of problems in monarchy, and a lot of people aren't happy with him. Unfamiliar operations French government. France's economic social situation is deteriorating. Wife is from Austria, a woman named Marie Antoinette, and she starts getting blamed for all the problems in France. And both are completely unaware of the depth of French discontent. Basically, just unaware of how the world is operating. So you have problems. People living in that kind of world is they don't understand the concerns of the people. They don't understand the concerns of I have to make this great to keep my scholarship, or how's my family going to eat this month, or am I going to keep a roof over my head tomorrow? They don't understand that. Nelson Rockefeller, one time Vice President of the United States, part of the Rockefeller family, multi-billionaires. He had a problem later in life because he was in his office trying to make a phone call and didn't know how to operate the phone. The secretaries always dialed the number and handed it to him. Didn't know how to do it. The last Tsar of Russia, Nicholas II, his daughters, once went on a shopping trip in Moscow. Okay, something the commoners do, it'd be fun, get to shop all the fine stores. They know what to do. When they do, they find what they want. They give the guy the money for it, and they leave. Because they have to pay for it. In a lot of cases, these trips, they might just give it to them for free just because, the royal family's come in. But no, they're going to pay for it. The story is they're giving the guy the money, but then the guy's giving the money back. They understand this. So they understand they're being given change. So things that are so natural and so obvious to us make no sense to people like that.
That's why they say they're out of touch.
Totally out of touch. Yeah. And so they have no idea how the world works. The concerns of the people. They don't understand that these problems are life and death for them. Like I said, they'll never go hungry. They'll never be without clothes. They'll be without a roof over their head. They'll never be without money. It's just such an abstract thought. It's just like saying, it's like telling them, what are we going to do about all these unicorns running down the hallway during classes, between classes? It's just something, problems that ordinary people have do not make sense to them. And so what's going to happen as a result of that is Louis XVI is not only unable to operate a government, he's unable to make decisions. He has no idea as how bad the problems are until the people storm the gates of Versailles, arrest him, and then finally chop his head off.
So they can do a teamwork?
Huh?
They can actually do a teamwork?
In a revolution, yeah. It doesn't happen very often, but it does. Louis XVI was horribly unpopular. The people rose up, overthrew him, finally decided that he was a traitor, and they executed him. We'll get to the story of that later on in the French Revolution. But you'll have other kings like that overthrown periodically by other men trying to be kings. Henry IV overthrew Richard II of England and had him executed. He basically had an army behind him to do that. But basically had enough people upset with Richard II, had enough power himself to do that, he could go in and do it. So, again, another one of the problems of the monarchy. Because once you get that job, it's yours for life, and there's no way to get rid of you if you're doing a bad job or you're just incompetent. You're stuck with that king forever until that king dies. So we get to Spain here. Also an absolutist regime. Has some good figures here. Has some not so good figures here. Start with Charles I. King 1560, 1556. Spain's really just getting going at this point. His ruling family, the Habsburgs, they rule most of Europe. So he's also the Holy Roman Emperor, basically controlling Germany. He also has lands in Italy, claims in France, colonies in the Americas. He's fighting Martin Luther over the Protestant Reformation in Germany, fighting wars with France over family claims in France. He abdicates in 1556. His health is declining. He's getting older, so I'm going to turn it over to somebody else for a while. Next, and move it on down the road a little bit. Philip IV is next. He invades and then takes over Portugal. Spain rules until 1640, but kept seeing after Charles I, though, is increasingly rapid decline in Spain, making billions of dollars off all this gold sort of being mined out of the New World over those colonies, but they're spending all the wars on palaces, basically anything but building of infrastructure. Basically, so much so by the mid-17th century they're bankrupt. But here's the problem also. The Habsburgs and many other royal families in Europe, but Spain especially, they have all that money, all that power, all that property. They don't want it divided up among the descendants, so they want to keep as much of it in the family as possible. So what happens? They marry their cousins. This is Spain, not West Virginia here. Marrying first cousins, generation after generation. So you go to this poor old guy here, Charles II.
So he wouldn't frown upon to marry a person?
No.
Wow.
XA. Most states in the United States, that's illegal because we know the problems behind that. In fact, Louisiana for years on the marriage license form, you had to swear that you weren't, to your knowledge, you weren't a first cousin with that person you're marrying. They kept the problem here, Charles II. It was called Charles the Bewitched. King from 1665 to 1700. Generations of inbreeding finally caught up to him. He was severely mentally disabled, barely able to speak, no control over his body functions, drooling over himself constantly. Comes to the throne at the age of 4 because his parents died. They were such ill health. Essentially, completely incapable of ruling a country. Just practically a vegetable. They tried to marry him off, but because of the severe inbreeding, he's impotent. And dies without a child at the age of 38. That's who was ruling Spain, an absolute monarchy. A man completely incapable of making any kind of decisions. It's a really sad life. Except today, 21st century, man like that be an institution. Said they had running their country. The time they really needed leadership. So, because Charles has no children, And the other children survive, basically severe inbreeding. You have the War of the Spanish Succession. The cousins are going to start fighting over who's going to be the successor. Just how bad it was for Charles II. The genome, the genetic structure, would be like just like if a brother and sister had married.
Oh, wow.
So the War of the Spanish Succession goes from about 1701 to 1714. We have two claimants here, Charles III, the Archduke of Austria, rules from about 1703 to 1715, various factions, various ways. And the other claimant, Philip V, basically was given the throne in 1700. But basically, these two factions and armies behind these two men are fighting one side or another to see who gets to be king. Charles is kicked off the throne, and the Habsburg ruling line ends in Spain, and they go with the House of Bourbon. Basically, the same ruling house was ruling France. Basically cousins to the 13th, 14th, those guys.
Philip rules from the House of Bourbon.
Yeah, that's his ruling dynasty. That's his family name, House of Bourbon.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he's not ruling from a bar or something in Madrid. But that's the name for the drink actually comes from the ruling house. That's the region they were from, they controlled, and that's where they brewed the stuff. So Bourbon Street in New Orleans is not just named just because there are a bunch of bars there. It's named after the French ruling family. So now you get to England. In England, you have a system of government involvement. Absolutism never really took hold in England. A couple of them tried it, but with dismal results. Okay, so by 1215, you have the Magna Carta being agreed to in England by King John. He didn't sign it because he was illiterate, but he agreed to it. He put his royal seal on it. Magna Carta from Latin means Great Charter. This was basically a list of limitations on the powers of the king, spelling out certain powers of the nobility. So people do have certain rights. Essentially, elements of common law, basically, the rights of the people in the court system in England started emerging from the Magna Carta. This is a huge step forward in English law and English civil liberties. Actually, the ideas from the Magna Carta that English colonies be taken to the Americas starting in the 1600s.
Yeah, I have a question. Were these kings, would it be compared to like North Korea today? Like, was it that bad?
Some of these countries, yeah, it would have been that bad. And some of those guys just that, shall we say, eccentric. Except I'm skipping over some of the more unsavory details of some of these guys. And so it's very mild, my story about Louis XV. Anyways, that bad. Like I say, you don't need to know it for the test. Some of the tales aren't polite mixed company.
Yeah, it makes you want to know about it.
Yeah. There are some good books about it. I do recommend looking it up. It could make a good subject for a paper.
That's Louis the 15th?
15th, yeah, among others. By the 1300s, Parliament emerges as basically an advisory body to the English king, basically advice on tax policy and so forth, financing the kingdom. And over time, Parliament ends up becoming a more of a representative body. more of less of an advisory body, more of a lawmaking body. That gets to the point where they're basically responsible for passing all the tax legislation in England, eventually all the legislation involving every other area of English life. But with Parliament, you have what comes one of the most important early representative bodies in Europe. Now, with Parliament, you have it's divided into two houses: the House of Lords, the Upper House, and the House of Commons. The House of Lords is the upper house, the House of Commons is the lower house. But everything from there, from Parliament, goes up to the King. Now in England, the King does have a veto power, but it hasn't been used in 300 years, since the 1710s. Queen Elizabeth could veto legislation today, probably lose her power to veto anything tomorrow. But it's a hereditary position. You get it because you're born into it. You have a veto power. Well, all legislation in the English system originates from the House of Commons. The power to propose legislation. But the House of Commons, the name's something of a misnomer. The Commons were not necessarily dominated much by commoners this time. A lot of titled nobles and so forth. Read the names of the early prime ministers, a lot of sirs and dukes and so forth, barons. Because those who could vote for the House of Commons basically were only people who owned a large amount of land. Like I said, men over 21 who owned a large amount of land. So you might have some parliamentary districts might have only 3, 4, 5 people who are eligible to vote. The vote was limited only to very, very select few. The idea of those they can vote, who can vote, expands a little bit more over time. So the House of Commons proposes legislation. Once approved, goes up to the House of Lords. That's the assembly of all the titled nobility in England. So where you're elected to the House of Commons, House of Lords is hereditary. You can't propose any legislation in the Lords, but you can veto legislation coming out of the Commons. But which means it's sent back to the Commons. House of Commons, if it votes something out 3 times, it goes past House of Lords and goes to the King for approval. Now the terms of office of the House of Commons, it really depends. Basically, the King can dissolve Parliament and order an election anytime he wants, early on anyway. Now, so that bases up to the Prime Minister. But basically, they had to have an election within 5 years. Now, more and more they're getting to the point where they have a fixed term. They're trying to move towards a 5-year term for members of the House of Commons, 5 years between elections. But the idea, though, is Parliament can have what they call a no confidence vote. Basically say, we don't like the Prime Minister, and basically fire the Prime Minister on the spot. In which case they can have a new election, or the King can call for a new election. But suppose the King dies and a new one comes in. You may have had a Parliament election 6 weeks earlier. You have to have another one. New King, new Parliament. And the head of the Parliament is a man called the Prime Minister. Now today the Prime Minister is simply the head of the majority party of Parliament. In this case it's David Cameron. I have to pass out a sheet here, a list of Prime Ministers, so you don't have to memorize all these guys. But just so you can keep score at home. Thanks, sir. So basically, today, to be Prime Minister, you have to be the head of the majority party in Parliament. This case is the Conservative Party. David Cameron, Prime Minister since 2010. He's got re-elected. But before this, like the 1700s and early 1800s, the Prime Minister was simply who the King chose. They could say, I want you to be Prime Minister. I want you to form a ruling coalition around you. Basically, get a majority of members of Parliament to pass my legislative agenda. So I suppose you can get the job done. King say, okay, I'm dissolving Parliament, having a new election. Now we can get that majority around you. Or the King could say, okay, I want you to be Prime Minister. You get a ruling majority around you. Basically, to play musical chairs, the Prime Minister gets who he wants. So no term limits on Prime Minister. Prime Ministers have been there for as short as 6 months. Some have been there 20 years. But you can be Prime Minister any number of times. Yes, some of those men on that list have been Prime Minister 4 or 5 times. Gladstone, Disraeli among them. Winston Churchill was Prime Minister twice. On a quick note, if you have a question on English history, Winston Churchill is not always the default answer. So it's popular, he's important, but only where World War II is concerned. He's not going to be the answer with George I. Let's talk about what happens here. You have Queen Anne. Comes to the throne in 1702. She is the last of the Stuart line. Basically, her father had been overthrown by Parliament years before during the English Civil War. She was raised in exile, and her had the Restoration, and Charles II, her oldest brother, came to the throne. She came back to England. But by 1702, she's the last one left. So her 2 brothers became king. They didn't have children, at least none were allowed to come to the throne. His sister, their sister Mary, came to the throne with her husband William of Orange, but they didn't have any children. Sad story about Anne. She had like 12 children. All of them died. Just things that happen back then. Illness, accidents, all died. So she's queen because she's the last one in line. Dies in 1714. No clear heir. Last of the Stuart line. What happens during her reign is something called the Act of Union. 1707, Parliament passes legislation bringing together the 3 kingdoms that Queen Anne ruled: England, Scotland, and Ireland. Now, the Stuarts were the kings of Scotland. Basically, they were cousins to the Tudors. When they didn't have any more heirs left, they went to the cousins, the Stuarts, who were ruling Scotland. So you had the King of England, the King of Scotland at the same time. England occupied Ireland forcibly, so they're also the king of. So the official title was Queen Anne, Queen of England, Scotland, and Ireland. So the Act of Union, they put them all together as the United Kingdom. The Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. That's Great Britain and Northern Ireland. It's simply just England was something called UK. Well, she's gone, so they have to go to the next series of cousins. They want somebody who's Protestant. Somebody's not going to make too much of a fuss over a constitutional monarchy that is monarchy with limited power, so they go with the House of Hanover. They're German. Let's go with King George I. George Hanover is an amiable, likable guy. He's Does an okay job as an administrator. But here's the thing: he doesn't speak a word of English. He only speaks German. So he's not very familiar with the English system. Can't really communicate with people very well in England. So what he ends up doing is turns over more and more responsibilities to Parliament. Parliament's very happy to have that job. Very happy to take over these duties of the king. So Parliament starts having more and more responsibilities over the English government. Because basically George I can't really run it that well. Can't run a country if you can't speak the language. Well, he was a popular enough figure. Dies. His son George II takes over in 1727. Still doesn't speak English very well, not very familiar with the English system. Kind of continues that system. So more power is turned over to ministers, and particularly ministers from Parliament for day-to-day activities of the kingdom. Because with this time period, you have Robert Walpole becoming an early important prime minister, really kind of taking charge and defining the job. Walpole will be prime minister from 1721 to 1742, longest term of any prime minister in English history. What it has is a time period of relative peace for England, the new land taxes, you have an expanding middle class, and expanding British Empire. So Walpole's doing a pretty good job running the country for George I and George II. Well then, his grandson takes charge, the 20-year-old George III. He's going to be king during the American Revolution, the French Revolution before 1812. King for 60 years. He's a little more familiar with the English system. I've grown up with it. Sort of be a champion of the people at first, but he's just taking over just as England's winning a huge war, the French and Indian War. It grows steadily more conservative over time, and it grows steadily more confused over time, because you see, the Hanovers also have their own little inbreeding problem. The House of Hanover is known for, among other things, as hemophilia. That gene is passed down from one generation to the next in the Hanover family. Basically, hemophilia is a disease which makes it very difficult for blood to clot, if it does at all. Potentially deadly if it's untreated just right. In fact, it's passed on down the ruling line to the fact that it's going to end up showing up in very strange places in history. If we get to Russia at the end of his Tsardom. But also a problem with George III is his own condition, which is also hereditary, one called porphyria. Porphyria is a neurological disease which causes confusion, dementia, basically complete mental breakdown. One of the other bizarre symptoms it causes your urine to turn blue.
It's actually the treatment that they were giving you. That was a mineral treatment.
Yeah, that is one of the bizarre side effects you see of these things. George III went from being a very able, capable monarch, basically completely losing his mind, unable to reason, especially if the colonists are objecting to his policies, rebelling against him in Parliament. In fact, years after the American Revolution, he was still convinced that the colonies belonged to England. There's also this one instance where he has this long conversation with a tree he thought was the king of Prussia. We're both tall and thin, so it's an easy mistake to make. A tree. And the condition is hereditary. So that's kind of floating around the gene pool of the English monarchs today. Doesn't that fill you with pride? Next, there's a real good movie made about his mental breakdown attempts to try to treat him, called The Madness of King George. It was made early 1990s. Good movie. Like I say, your textbook talks about a lot of movies from history. Some are better than others. Madison King George is a good movie, but that one about Marie Antoinette, it's garbage. Worst movie ever made. Don't waste your time with it. Oh my gosh, it's horrible. It's the kind of movie you're glad she is beheaded at the end. But back to George III. Prime Minister is really kind of getting a lot of power at this time period. Basically, it's the moving into the role of the king is basically the power broker for England. Basically deciding, okay, which faction is going to rule Parliament? Who's going to be the Prime Minister? Who's going to get what spots? King gets to name that. King gets to decide when Parliament's dismissed and what isn't. There's some king before then that had gone decades between parliaments, like Charles I, they would call the Long Parliament. They ordered it closed and would allow it to come back into session for almost a decade. But George III, they had regular elections, regular prime ministers effectively governing the empire at this point. One of the more important ones was William Pitt the Elder. Called the Elder because he has a son who is also named William Pitt. But Pitt the Elder, Prime Minister twice from 1757 to 61 and from 1766 to 68. Twice. Very effective, very reasonable man. He was sympathetic to the problems of the colonies, but wasn't in a position able to do much about it. The city of Pittsburgh is actually named after him. His son Pitt the Younger would be Prime Minister from 1783 to 1801, also under George III. But essentially you have increasing power of Parliament. Slowly the power of who can vote is expanding, much so by the end of the 19th century, basically any man over 21 can vote in England. Women don't get the right to vote until 1919. It's a slow, steady expansion. It's an evolution from a monarchy to democracy. And you start seeing this with different countries around the world, different countries. For example, Prussia will have its own representative body, but they're going to have very, very little influence over the king. Austria, you can see a lot of attempts on Joseph II to create a more democratic society, but it's going to backfire horribly for him. Catherine the Great is going to try a kind of representative body. Representative bodies can be tried periodically in Russia, but they can be dismissed simply because it turned out to be more trouble, too much of an inconvenience for the czars. But overall, basically, you have these enlightened despots, basically people with absolute power in this time period, trying to bring a little more reform, a little more enlightenment to the people. Some more successful than others. In some cases, it's simply maybe a matter of just giving a bunch of money to a university or some great artist just to produce great art. At last, we are running out of time. Read chapter 18 in your book for next time. We'll talk about Prussia and Austria and Russia, Central and Eastern Europe. There's nothing more. I bid you adieu. May your day be better than Marie Antoinette.